From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Friday, August 8, 2025. Donald Trump has slapped a 50% tariff on India. That's because he says they're buying oil from Russia. And that's made it very tense around one of Australia's most important alliances, the Quad, due to meet in India later this year. Anthony Albanese says he won't discuss Palestinian statehood with Trump. The PM says the decision to recognise Palestine is one for the Australian government alone. Those stories are live right now at theaustralian.com.au. The English language test for would-be Australians is about to get easier. The opposition says the government has lost control of the migration system, and that's helping drive up the cost of housing. Today, reporter Noah Yim and I take the test.
I am doing the TOEFL practice speaking test.
Noah Yim is a journalist in the Australian's Canberra bureau.
Some people enjoy taking risks and trying new things.
Some people enjoy taking risks and trying new things.
Others are not adventurous.
Others are not adventurous.
As you can hear, Noah has no problems with English. English is actually his second language. Noah migrated to Australia from Korea as a kid. But we asked him to take the English language test that migrants to Australia need to sit because the test is going through a big change.
In paragraph 1, each of the following is mentioned as a feature of the city of Teotihuacan between AD 150 and 700, except A. regularly arranged streets, B. several administrative centres spread across the city, C. many manufacturing workshops.
English language proficiency is big business in Australia.
I think the answer is B, several administrative centres spread across the city.
We welcomed 210,000 permanent migrants in 2023-24, plus another 207,000 international students who came in temporarily. Noah, we had you take this test. It seemed quite hard.
It was quite hard, and honestly, I'm not sure that I did all that well.
And many of them had to sit a test like this. I enjoyed hearing you learn all about Teotihuacan.
I've never been to Teotihuacan, and I want to go someday now.
Are you going to be at the pub tonight telling your friends all about it?
Maybe.
Now, the English language entry test for Australia is famously tough. A few years ago, a friend of mine, a tertiary educated native English speaker from the United Kingdom, failed one of the tests twice, partly because she was asked to write an essay about nuclear power, something she had absolutely no idea about. That was on one of the proficiency standards used by the Department of Immigration called the Pearson's English Test, which, despite its rather quaint name, strikes terror into the heart of would-be Australians. There's a whole cottage industry of how-tos and coaching clinics like this one on YouTube.
Pay attention to the verb tenses I've used throughout the essay. There's a mix of present simple, present continuous, present perfect, future simple, active, and passive.
In this sample test, the host asks me to analyse a 300-word text.
Your job is to summarise that text down into a single sentence.
The text starts, "Why has the Leaning Tower of Pisa in Italy survived the strong earthquakes that have hit the region since the Middle Ages?" The answer, I think, is that scientists have discovered that the very tall and stiff shape of the tower, combined with the very soft soil beneath it, means it is protected from earthquake vibrations. I feel like I really learned something there, Noah, but I had to really concentrate, and English is my first language. It feels like Australia has set the bar quite high.
In some ways, it sounds like it has, but to be fair, there are about 5 different levels of English proficiency that we set as benchmarks to get other specific types of visas. And the lowest is called the Functional English Language Proficiency. That's set quite low on various exams. This sounds like they're pretty well past the first and second stages of Duolingo for English. And to be fair, that's a pretty advanced level in terms of languages that you don't know, but I suspect we have a pretty hard time having conversations beyond superficial things with people who can only speak English to this level.
And then tell me about the higher levels of tests that Australia asks people to take. Who takes them and what kinds of things do they have to demonstrate that they can do?
So at the highest level, which is a superior level according to the legislation, we get to a pretty high level. So these people are who can read, fully comprehend longer texts. This is conversational English. This is a level of English that we would use every day. This is a pretty advanced level of English, and they can start making complex arguments, complex subjects, complex sentence structures. So, pretty well able to engage in a conversation at the pub or on a train or, even perhaps in a lecture theatre.
Were you surprised, Noah, by the level of proficiency that you were required to demonstrate in this sample test that you've taken?
Yes, I was. English is my second language, actually, and I felt like I was being tested again.
Do you feel like that this is being adhered to, that everybody who's living here in Australia is actually meeting this functional level of English?
I mean, as you said, even native English speakers sometimes have trouble with this. So I suspect that for some of the higher levels, this is a robust test from the looks of it. At the higher levels, you need to be able to speak at a pretty advanced level. So no, this is probably a challenging test for most people to take. And whether every Australian can hand on heart say they meet the highest threshold of this English test, I suspect most can't.
Yeah, I noticed on Reddit quite a few conversations about people strategising about how to pass these tests. And a lot of them were Americans or people from the United Kingdom, native English speakers who were very daunted about this prospect and very concerned about whether they'd actually be able to pass or not. What do you think about that, Noah, as a matter of policy? If we are making it so difficult for people to pass an English language test, even if they are native English speakers, is your sense that we might have set it a bit too high?
Perhaps. We do have specific clauses here about other ways that people can pass the English requirement for visas. So, for example, if they did schooling in the US or in the UK or Canada or places like that, we do just let them in and we assume that they're sufficiently proficient at English. But if people in the US and the UK who grew up with English, for whom English is their only language, are really, worried about these tests, well, yes, then these tests are far too hard.
Coming up, more of my chat with Noah Yim. Now, the reason we're talking about this is that the tests are changing. Tell me about the changes.
So the Australian government has released regulation this week that lowers the standard for the functional proficiency requirements for English on a whole bunch of tests, specifically on two tests, the TOEFL and the PTE. So the minimum mark that you need to achieve in those tests to be able to be granted, to be eligible for the visas that require that specific level, that's been lowered.
The visas where functional English is required include training visas where you're advancing your professional skills and work and holiday visas where people aged 18 to 30 can come in for a year up to 3 times, having a holiday and spending some of the time working in specified sectors like fruit picking, abattoir work, jobs in Northern Australia like hospitality and construction, or disaster recovery in regional areas.
So according to Pearson, who's one of the organisations that administers one of these tests, the previous mark would have meant that someone can understand sentences and frequently use expressions, and they can also communicate in simple and routine tasks requiring a simple and direct exchange of information on familiar or routine matters. But the new requirement by the Australian government for marks means that this person now only needs to meet the criteria of someone who can understand and use familiar everyday expressions and very basic phrases and can interact in a simple way provided the other person talks slowly and clearly and is prepared to help. So that's really going from someone who sounds like they can get through daily life reasonably well, maybe with a little bit of friction. Now the standard's going down, according to Pearson, to at least someone who might need a little bit of help and assistance from the public. So it's not an insignificant drop down according to Pearson standards. The coalition has certainly hit out hard at this. Opposition Home Affairs spokesman Andrew Hastie told us that the current level of migration to Australia is unsustainable and that the Labor government, instead of moderating immigration, quote, the minister is lowering minimum English proficiency standards, end quote, and that the migration system is going to get out of control and it's only going to get worse. He says that Australians are worse off under Labor's immigration policy. Our infrastructure is under pressure, essential services are stretched thin, and young Australians are locked out of the housing market. Social cohesion is fraying.
Yeah, this was a line that the opposition worked really hard during the election campaign, that they were going to get migration under control, that migration was one of the reasons why young people in Australia were struggling to buy a house. It looks from what Andrew Hastie is saying as though they think that's a message that's working for them.
After the resounding election defeat, we've seen the opposition undertake an entire policy review, but there are some parts of their agenda which they really wanted to drive the stakes into the ground and say, but this is what the Liberal Party, even despite the election loss, stands for. And it looks like what Andrew Hastie is doing here is he's repeating that line that Peter Dutton often deployed during the election about immigration.
So Noah, why is the government making these changes then?
When I talked to immigration expert Abel Rivsi, what he told me is that this must be the outcome of a long-term review where they're trying to align the relative performance in each various English language test to each other. So the IELTS is the benchmark. That's what he told me. IELTS stands for International English Language Testing System. And the other two big tests are the Test of English as a Foreign Language, or TOEFL test, and the Pearson's test. They had their minimum standards lowered in the last regulation change.
How do you think we've ended up in a situation where we've got multiple tests and this, what seems like a very complex system to administer?
It is a very complex system. There's a whole bunch of other tests as well, all with various acronyms, all with various testing regimes. And I've read reports that there are other tests and other organizations trying to get onto this list as well. All of these are private providers. You know, Pearson's very famous educational publisher. I think a whole bunch of these are associated with universities in part as well. These are all private tests, not administered by government. You sit down and take their test, and then you submit those scores to various government agencies. It seems like a pretty lucrative market.
It's classic, isn't it? When you, as an English speaker, dip your toe into trying to understand something like the Department of Immigration, you just get a sense of how impenetrable it must be to people who aren't very confident with English.
Yeah, that's right. And how expensive it is as well to apply for some of these visas. You can understand why migration agents are such a big industry. Prospective migrants into Australia often retake these tests multiple times, spending hundreds, even thousands in the process. And then on top of that, they may just have to relent and go to a migration agent instead of going through the process themselves, which also costs a lot of money just because Australia's migration system is so complex. There are so many visa classes, costs attached to most of those visas as well. So it's a really impenetrable process.
Noah Yim is a journalist in the Australian's Federal Parliamentary Press Gallery Bureau. You can read his journalism and all the rest of our coverage of politics anytime at theaustralian.com.au.